In today's episode, we're diving into 3 real cases of people who vanished, not into a storm, not into a war zone, but in broad daylight with no warning and no trace. A seasoned hunter who disappears yard from his friends. A young tourist who ran from something or someone no one else could see. And a solo adventurer whose final moments defy all logic. These are the true stories of people who vanished without a trace. So it's the summer of 1988, and Keith Reinhard, a 49-year-old guy from Chicago, is having what you'd probably call a midlife crisis. He's a sports writer by trade, spent decades at a desk job working deadlines, churning out articles day after day. It's the kind of life that's safe, comfortable, but slowly eats away at you. And for Keith, it had gotten bad enough that he decided he needed a total reset. So he takes a sabbatical from work, 6 months off. His plan? To move out to the tiny mountain town of Silver Plume, Colorado, and finally chase his real dream of becoming a novelist. Now, Silver Plume, this place is tiny, like ghost town tiny. Maybe 200 people living there max. It's tucked away into this narrow valley along I-70, surrounded by towering mountains. You walk down the main street, if you even want to call it that, and you can feel it. It's quiet, empty. Like the mountains are just waiting to close in and swallow the whole place up. But to Keith, it feels perfect. Rustic, isolated, the kind of place where you can finally hear yourself think. So he rents a little apartment above a bakery. Friendly locals help him move in, and he buys an old storefront and plans to open up a small antique shop on the side. He sets up a desk by the window and starts writing. The dream is happening. Only things aren't going the way he hoped. The isolation, it starts to creep in. And Keith, he starts getting weird. Locals notice he's obsessed with something. Always asking questions, always poking around. Fixated on the story of another man who had vanished from Silver Plume just a year earlier. The guy's name was Tom Young. Another middle-aged man, another dreamer. He ran a tiny bookstore in town. And one day, Tom Young just disappeared. Left his dog locked inside his shop. No note, no explanation, just vanished. For months, nobody knew what had happened to him. Then, in July 1988, literally days before Keith arrived in town, Tom's remains were finally found deep in the mountains, about an hour hike from town. He had died from a gunshot wound to the head. Police ruled it a suicide, case closed. But Keith, he wasn't buying it. He started digging, asking around. Why would Tom hike into the wilderness to die? Why leave no goodbye, no explanation? He became so obsessed with Tom's story that he decided to base a novel around it. A fictionalized version where a man uncovers a dark secret in a small town and disappears into the mountains. It was supposed to be fiction. But then, Keith started to act like he was living it. It's August 7th, 1988. Keith tells friends he's going for a hike. He says he's going to climb nearby Pendleton Mountain, a steep, rugged peak just outside of town. Now Keith, he isn't a hiker. He's not an outdoorsman. He's barely been in the mountains a month. He doesn't pack any water, doesn't bring a jacket, no survival gear. He's wearing blue jeans, a flannel shirt, and cowboy boots. Yep, cowboy boots. It's around 4:30 p.m. when he leaves, late in the day. Locals watch him head up the trail behind town, and that's the last time anyone ever sees him. At first, people aren't too worried. Maybe he got turned around, maybe he spent the night somewhere. But by the next morning, when he still hasn't returned, the alarm bells start ringing. They call search and rescue, and within hours, helicopters are circling the mountains. Ground teams, dogs, even mountaineering experts flood the area. And here's the thing. They find nothing. Not a boot print, not a scrap of clothing, not even a single sign that Keith ever made it more than a few hundred yards out of town. And when they start piecing together his last few days, things get darker. Keith has been telling friends that he believed in destiny, that he needed to go on a solo quest, that he was going to do something big. Some say he seemed excited. Others say he seemed resigned, like he knew he wasn't coming back. Searchers focus on Pendleton Mountain. Its brutal terrain, steep scree slopes, sudden cliffs, and dense forests. In good weather, it's a dangerous climb. In cowboy boots and no supplies, it's suicide. They search for 5 days straight. Teams rappel down cliffs, comb creeks, and fan out across the ridges, and still nothing. Then tragedy strikes. One of the search planes crashes while flying a grid pattern over the mountains. The pilot is killed instantly. And after that, the search is called off. It's as if Silver Plume had claimed another soul. Then the theories start flying. At first, everyone assumes Keith must have fallen. Maybe he slipped, tumbled into a crevice, or got buried under a rock slide. But the longer time goes on with no trace, no body, no clothing, nothing, the wilder the theories get. Some locals whisper that Keith faked his death, inspired by the very novel he was trying to write, that he walked into the wilderness, circled back, and then disappeared into a new life somewhere. Others think it was suicide. Maybe the weight of failure, loneliness, and obsession with Tom Young broke him. But there's a third theory, one that locals don't like to talk about too much. They say Silver Plume has secrets. Old mining tunnels run deep under the mountains, hidden caves, abandoned shafts, dangerous places that aren't on any map. Maybe Keith found something out there. Maybe he found something that he wasn't supposed to find. And maybe someone made sure he never came back. Today, Keith Reinhardt's story is almost forgotten. Silver Plume is still there, a few dusty buildings in a sleepy mountain valley. Hikers sometimes report strange things when they venture off trail near Pendleton Mountain. A glimpse of a figure in the trees, a voice calling from somewhere up the slope. Maybe it's just the wind, maybe it's the mountains remembering, or maybe it's Keith, still chasing the story he never got to finish. The Vanishing of Tom Messick. If you had to bet on someone who wouldn't get lost in the woods, it'd probably be Tom Messick. 82 years old, sure, a little older, but a lifelong outdoorsman, an Army vet, a survival instructor for young kids. He spent decades hiking, fishing, and hunting the dense forests of New York's Adirondack Mountains. The guy knew the woods like the back of his hand. And he wasn't reckless, he was cautious and careful. The kind of guy who always kept a knife in his boot and a plan in his head. Which is exactly what makes what happened on November 15th, 2015 so hard to understand. Tom Messick went hunting with a group of friends, 7 of them total, all older men, longtime buddies and hunting partners. They headed up near Brant Lake, about 2 hours north of Albany, into a rugged, remote patch of forest, a place they'd all hunted many times before. And somehow, during a simple deer hunt in the middle of the day, Tom Messick disappeared, cleanly, completely, and was never seen again. The way the hunt was organized was pretty standard. The group split into 2 teams. 4 men would post up along a ridgeline as watchers, sitting quietly waiting for deer to be flushed toward them. 3 men would walk through the woods from the other side, making noise to drive the deer in their direction. Tom was assigned as a watcher. He wasn't in great health. He'd recently had some hearing loss and one of his legs wasn't very strong, so he was posted fairly close to a logging road, not deep in the woods. In fact, he was probably less than 100 yards from the road. The plan was simple: to set up, wait, and regroup after a couple of hours. They all had radios, they all had rifles, and they'd all hunted this area for decades. Nothing about it should have been risky. The hunt went on for about 2 hours. The walkers made their way toward the watchers. When they got to the rendezvous point, everyone showed up, except Tom. At first they figured he'd wandered a little bit, maybe tried to get a better vantage point on some game, maybe took a different route back to the road. No big deal. But after shouting for him and getting no answer, the group started to get uneasy. Tom wasn't the kind of guy who'd just leave without telling anyone, especially not with his age and medical issues. They fanned out and searched the immediate area, but nothing. No footprints, no scuff marks, no broken branches. It was just like he evaporated. By that evening, they called in the authorities. Over the next few days, the search effort ballooned into one of the largest in New York State history. Hundreds of volunteers, canine units, helicopters with infrared cameras, drones, and expert trackers showed up to help. They combed the area methodically, grid by grid. But nothing. No blood, no clothing, no dropped gear, no weapon. Nothing. It didn't make sense, especially because Tom's position near the road should have made it easy to find him, even if he'd gotten disoriented. The search continued for weeks, but then temperatures dropped and the snow came, and still there was no sign of Tom Messick. Eventually, the official search was called off. His family and his friends were left without answers. There's a handful of theories about what happened to Tom. None of them are satisfying. The simplest explanation is that Tom suffered a heart attack or stroke, wandered off in confusion, and collapsed somewhere hard to find. But again, the area had been searched heavily. Dogs would have picked up his scent. Helicopters should have seen some sign of a body. And he wasn't deep in rugged backcountry. He was near a road, near clearings. The second theory is that there was an animal attack. Some suggested a bear or mountain lion could have attacked him and dragged him off. But New York State officials said there were no confirmed mountain lion sightings in that area, and black bears are incredibly rare to attack humans, especially during deer season when they're hibernating. Plus, there was no sign of a struggle, no blood trail, and no ripped clothing. The third theory is that of foul play. Some of Tom's family members have said on the record that they believe something or someone took him. There are whispered rumors among locals that the woods up there aren't as empty as they seem. Drug runners, hermits, other less explainable things. But there's no evidence and no witnesses and no signs of a confrontation. Just silence. The last theory is something stranger. Some point out that Tom's disappearance shares strange similarities with other cases cataloged by missing persons researcher David Paulides, specifically his missing 411 cases. Patterns like skilled outdoorsmen vanishing without a trace, dogs unable to track the scent, immediate area thoroughly searched and no results, and disappearances near boulder fields, dense forests, water sources. Tom's case hits a lot of those notes. But again, no clear proof, just eerie patterns. There's a small chilling detail that doesn't get talked about much. One of the other hunters that day reportedly heard a strange noise in the woods shortly before they realized Tom was missing. He described it as something like a snap or a crash, like a tree branch breaking violently. It wasn't a gunshot, it wasn't a known animal call, just a sudden loud noise in the otherwise silent forest, and then nothing. Some believe whatever made that noise might have had something to do with Tom's disappearance. Others think it's just the forest being the forest. There are still unanswered questions. How does a man with limited mobility near a road simply vanish without a trace? Why did trained dogs and helicopters find nothing? No body, no belongings, and no footprints. What caused that sudden, unexplained noise before he disappeared? Nobody knows. And maybe nobody ever will. Tom Messick's family still holds out hope that someday someone will stumble across something, maybe a rifle or a hat, or even a set of bones, anything. Until then, he remains one of the strangest, most chilling wilderness disappearances in modern U.S. history, a man who walked into the forest and never walked back out. The disappearance of Lars Mittank. At first, it seemed like just another vacation gone slightly wrong. 28-year-old Lars Mittank was on a trip with his friends, a cheap sun-soaked getaway to the beaches of Bulgaria. A little beer, a little soccer, nothing crazy. He was a normal guy, working class, soft-spoken, a huge soccer fan. Nothing about Lars set off alarm bells. Until it did. Because in the span of about 3 days, Lars Mittank went from a completely average tourist to a man sprinting for his life out of an airport, alone, never to be seen again. What happened in between is still one of the strangest, most unsettling missing persons cases in Europe and maybe in the world. It was late June 2014. Lars and a group of his close friends flew from Germany to Varna, a bustling tourist city in Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. Think cheap hotels, warm beer, packed beaches, and lots of European soccer on TV. It was a fun trip. For the first few days, everything was fine. But on the night of June 30th, something changed. That night, Lars got into an argument with some other German tourists over soccer teams. Just a dumb alcohol-fueled disagreement about whose team was better. Nothing serious. But later that night, after the group had gone out to a fast food place, Lars told his friends he'd been jumped by a group of men, supposedly hired by the guys he'd argued with earlier. He said he got punched in the head and that his ear hurt. He seemed rattled, but not seriously injured. Still, the next day his ear was bothering him enough that he decided to see a doctor. He visited a local clinic where they diagnosed him with a ruptured eardrum. Nothing life-threatening, but it was enough that the doctor told him, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't fly yet. Pressure changes could mess you up." They prescribed him an antibiotic and advised him to stay grounded until his ear healed. Lars's friends offered to stay behind with him, but he told them to go ahead. He'd catch a later flight, he said. He'd be fine. They didn't argue, and they said goodbye. Lars checked into a cheap hotel near the airport. And that is when things started getting weird. From the moment he checked into the hotel, a place called Hotel Color, Lars started acting strangely. Security footage shows him pacing the lobby, walking in and out, looking over his shoulder constantly. He called his mother back in Germany several times, and during those calls he told her, "They're following me. I don't feel safe. I need to leave." He didn't say who they were or why he thought they were after him. At one point, he even texted her, "Cancel my credit cards." In another call, he whispered that he was hiding from 4 men who were trying to kill him. It didn't make any sense. Nobody at the hotel reported seeing anyone suspicious. Nobody at the airport reported any problems. Lars was alone. On July 8th, after nearly a week in Bulgaria, Lars decided to head to the airport. His mother had arranged for him to fly home. She even set up an appointment for him to see a doctor before boarding, just to clear him to fly with his ear injury. At first, everything seemed normal. Security cameras show Lars arriving at the Varna airport around 6 a.m. carrying his backpack. He calmly talks to the airport staff, he checks in, and he's directed to the airport doctor for a final checkup. And that's where things fall apart. According to the doctor, Lars seemed nervous during the exam, agitated. Then, while they were talking, a construction worker walked into the clinic to do some unrelated maintenance. And when Lars saw the man, just a random worker in a yellow vest, he freaked out. Without warning, Lars jumped to his feet. He shouted something and bolted out of the clinic. He left his luggage, his passport, his wallet, and his phone behind. He sprinted out of the airport. CCTV footage shows him running through the terminal doors, across the parking lot, and into a field surrounded by dense forest. And that was it. He disappeared into the trees and was never seen again. At first, authorities thought he'd turn up in a few hours. Maybe he'd had a psychotic break. Maybe he'd gotten lost and needed some time. But Lars didn't come back, and nobody reported seeing him. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, and local police. But they found nothing. There was no sign of Lars Mittank anywhere. No clothing, no body, no sightings. The fields around the airport aren't huge. It's not deep wilderness. But somehow, Lars managed to vanish into thin air. The most common theory is that Lars suffered a psychotic break, possibly triggered by a combination of factors. First, the head injury, Second, the antibiotic he was taking, which in rare cases can cause hallucinations and paranoia. And third, stress from being in a foreign country alone. Some experts think that he genuinely believed people were after him, even though no one was. In a panic, he ran into the woods, disoriented and frightened, and either died from exposure or got injured and couldn't find help. Some believe there actually were people following him, that the initial beating wasn't random, that maybe he got caught up in something bigger than a soccer argument, drug smuggling or organ trafficking, something dark operating in the shadows of a tourist city. In this version, Lars's paranoia wasn't paranoia, it was justified fear. Maybe he ran because he was being hunted. Another theory is that Lars chose to vanish, that he staged his disappearance to start a new life. But there's no real evidence of that, and nobody who knew Lars believes it. He was close to his family, he had a steady job, and he had no history of mental illness. Running off into the Bulgarian countryside with no money and no passport and no plans seems unlikely. There are still some unanswered questions in the case of Lars Mittank. If Lars simply got lost and died, why was no trace ever found? If someone harmed him, why didn't any witnesses come forward? What triggered his sudden explosion of fear at the airport doctor's office? Who, if anyone, was he running from? No one knows. Almost 10 years later, his case remains open. His mother still leaves the porch light on for him. Every so often, there's a rumored sighting, a young man wandering in Eastern Europe, but none of them have ever been confirmed. Lars Mittank ran out of the airport on a sunny summer day and never was seen again.